How often do we stop to analyze how our environments are making us feel?
You can discern the key of a song through feeling alone.
When we think about music, it's usually in terms of something that gives us pleasure or something we enjoy.
And images of bass are really important in, say, the traditions and genres that have come out of reggae sound system culture.
Everyone knows that music is a great healer. It's been understood for millennia.
Humans are mainly visual animals. However, all our senses work in tandem. When one sense is infringed, another compensates. As we become more advanced, we are able to limit our sensory inputs or enhance them. We can close our eyes or treat them with lasers to make them sharper. Sound may be the only sensory input that we cannot really block out. It's not as easy as putting your fingers in your ears. How often do we stop to analyze how our environments are making us feel? The moment we exit the womb, we begin to experience a new dimension of sensory perception, determined by how our brains interpret waves reaching our sensory inputs. This is a pronounced sensation, which is often first received as a shock.
This is a journey into sound. A journey which along the way will bring to you new color, new dimension, new values, and a new experience. Stereophonic sound.
Pump up the volume, pump up the volume.
When all is ready, I throw this switch.
Pump up the volume, pump up the volume.
Pump that bass.
We interrupt this broadcast to bring you a special news bulletin from our on-the-spot task force.
Oh my gosh, the music just turns me on.
When we reach this new frontier, we begin to rediscover sound waves and how to turn them into useful information. But what exactly is sound, and how does it affect us? Let's imagine we are alien to the concept of sound as we know it or experience it. For those of us who are fortunate enough to have perfect hearing, we develop the potential to hear everything between 20 Hz up to 20 kHz. To put that in perspective, it's possible to hear everything between the lowest purr from your pet cat up to the sound emitted by the mosquito device. A principal function of sound is language, a means of communication. Humans have developed over 7,000 languages. At least 43% of these languages spoken are endangered. Much of what we know of language develops while we are in the womb. Patricia Carl is an expert on critical periods of development in language in babies in childhood.
What we see here is a mother in India, and she's speaking Koro, which is a newly discovered language. And she's talking to her baby. What this mother and the 800 people who speak Koro in the world understand that to preserve this language, they need to speak it to the babies. Work in my lab is focused on the first critical period in development, and that is the period in which babies try to master which sounds are used in their language. We think by studying how the sounds are learned, we'll have a model for the rest of language, and perhaps for critical periods that may exist in childhood for social, emotional, and cognitive development.
Whilst in the womb, we perceive low frequency only. Sound beyond these low-end extremities is often known as infrasound. Elephants have been said to be able to hear within this range of sound, which may be how they detect sources of water on their migrational journeys and how they communicate over vast distances using seismic detail. Humans can't produce these sounds, but we can often perceive and see the effects of these sounds. Tim Storms holds the record for the widest vocal range and the lowest known sound produced by a human.
Note would be somewhere around it. If you were to take another piano and sit on the bottom, on the left side of a piano, that would be about how low I can go. 8 octaves lower than the lowest G on the piano.
This is a unique example of human infrasound. However, infrasound is not always as pleasant as Tim's voice. Sounds that are outside our hearing range may not be audible, but can still have a huge effect on us. Studies have shown that infrasound may cause loss of sleep through low-frequency sounds, such as those produced by wind turbines. And then, of course, there's the mythical brown note.
Mammy found the brown noise. Here, look. Okay, let's see. Okay. Ready, Kenny? Woo! Woo! No way. I don't believe it. I'm seriously, you guys. Come on, watch. Okay.
At the other end of the scale, sounds above 20 kilohertz are termed as ultrasound. Ultrasound has been used in various fields, from the military through to medicine.
In the last 10, 20 years, a lot of research has been done with ultrasound. The way the ultrasound resonates with certain parts of the body, and as we know, women who are going to get pregnancy scans, it's often called an ultrasound scan. So the way in which these waves move through the body, that can be imaged and can show you what's inside the body.
Ultrasound has also been utilised to shatter kidney stones and clean surfaces of medical implements. There seems to be an innate connection between life and sound, something that is often taken for granted. Often it seems to feel like a connection that reaches past humanity itself and has a function across all matter, organic and non-organic. Before we dive deeper into sound, let's make a distinction between some of the words often used to describe what we perceive.
I think the distinction that I would make between 3 different ideas of noise, sound and music is that music is a subset of sound. So music is organized and structured sound, and the way noise comes into this equation is that, as something which is structured, as a structured signal, when that signal is being communicated between a sender and a receiver, anything which interrupts with the smooth communication of that signal is usually what is understood as noise. So that's the kind of information theory idea of what noise is, which is often applied to music. Another notion of what noise is a name given to music that people don't have the words to understand. In other words, if your parents don't like the kind of music you're into, they might call it noise because they're not used to it, they don't understand it, they don't like it, so it can be used as a criticism. But usually it refers to organized sound which the perceiver doesn't have the conceptual or affective equipment to comprehend or to appreciate.
I guess people notice, they think about loudness and the amplitude. It doesn't necessarily have to be really loud to be damaging. And also there's context as well, like what you listen to. Your neighbour might be playing something that you hate, that style of music. That's going to stress you out more than something else that you like, regardless of the volume levels. So there's always that context as well for the individual.
But why should sound affect us in any way at all? Apart from the fact that we perceive sound through our ears, we also feel sound. Our bodies are composed mainly of water, somewhere between 70 to 90% for the average human. One of the properties of water is that it makes an amazing conductor of sound. Adam Williams is a believer in using sound, music, frequency, and vibrations to deliver wellness and perform a function within medicine.
The human body is 70% water, and so it seems natural that if we can use that fact to create a better fidelity of low frequencies in music that don't get interfered with while travelling through the air before they hit the body, to transmit them directly through contact into the body, and then they travel very effectively. It means the music is not only a true fidelity of the material that you're listening to or feeling, but it can be experienced in a fairly intense way without everyone else being disturbed. We understand the frequencies that work for different conditions, and the data is being gathered more and more. Now in mainstream medicine, vibrasonics is being used for post-operative recovery, for pain relief. They're having remarkable results with Parkinson's disease, with attention deficit disorder. All sorts of human dysfunction seems to benefit from these therapies, and now we're nailing down the frequencies that are working. They've even found frequencies which can condition the muscular reflex system, and some of the American sports organizations are using it. They found that a 20-minute treatment before an athlete's performance can speed up reaction time.
As well as being a force for good, and as well as being a source of information, the ability to hear has also been used to incapacitate. It is often said that music can heal the savage beast. However, as a race, we consistently develop more sophisticated methods of harming and arming our fellow human. Some of these techniques extend into the use of sound as a weapon and the idea of sonic warfare. Popular culture and music has many references to the battlefield.
When we think about music, it's usually in terms of something that gives us pleasure or something we enjoy. So what my book Sonic Warfare is interested in is the kind of dark side of that, where suddenly pieces of compositions of sound or music are used in order to irritate or cause pain or torture, or just literally to move people around, to get people to leave a space or to get people to come to a space. So it's the use of sound to change the way people feel and behave and move. Probably one of the clearest contemporary examples of this is a lot of the street protests, rioting, civil disobedience situations of the last 5 to 10 years. The police and the military have often deployed these devices called long-range acoustic devices, which on one level are just directional loudspeakers, very high intensity, high volume directional loudspeakers, but they also have the ability to emit high-pitched frequencies, which are just really painful to listen to and really irritating. And the minute they switch these devices on to emit these painful frequencies, protesters are forced, in a way they're disabled, in the sense that they're forced to cover their ears with their hands. So that's probably one of the most obvious contemporary examples of the kind of phenomena I'm talking about in the book. There's another side to it, which is in the history of music culture, this idea of sonic warfare, or the use of sounds from the battlefield or from warfare, whether it be sirens, gunshots, missiles, the sound of missiles. Whistling has a long history of being used within the history of music too, as instruments, in a sense, as sounds which are replacing musical instruments. Going right back to the early 20th century and the futurists and the idea of the art of noise, right through to kind of hip hop and kind of reggae, dancehall culture in Jamaica, Gabba from Belgium. All of these different diverse music cultures have, one way or another, used kind of martial or militarized sound within the sphere of music. So the book is really looking at the two sides of it: the way the police and the military use sound as a weapon, and the way this idea of sound as a weapon has been appropriated and repurposed within the remit of music culture.
One aspect of experiencing sound is how different frequencies within the spectrum affect us, orally and physically. The physicality of sound arises at the extreme ends of the spectrum, closer to infrasound and closer to ultrasound. These ends, especially the low end, have a meaningful relationship between nature and humans, and have had a long history of impacting on the evolution of the species to instill feelings of safety as well as feelings of fear. But what might be the reason for this effect?
That's a big question. It's a primeval thing. It's something so old, the idea of nature. I guess if you go back enough in time, before you had electronic instruments and amplifiers and instruments and technology that enables us to experience things, we would have experienced low frequencies, like thunder, lightning, stampedes of animals, music and drumming. It's something that's very pure and something that affects us on a very, very subconscious level. And that can go both ways. That can it can instill fear or enjoyment. And I've had both of them sort of experiences in a dance with a sound system. So yeah, it's a very, very simple thing, but the idea of physicality of music it's a very important thing, and it's something that means a lot to us now. And it's something that controls people. We feel these things. Like I say, whether it's fight or flight, if you feel something rumbling, something's up, your body reacts to it. You react to physicality more than you do to audible signals. There's studies to show that. Is that enough of an answer?
What is it about bass culture? Most popular music has now felt the influence of bass culture and music synonymous with dancehall culture and the music of the African diaspora. What is it about bass that instills a love or fetishism?
Images of bass are really important in, say, the traditions and genres that have come out of reggae sound system culture, because it has a symbolic significance. And I think something of the power of jouissance is conveyed in that symbolic significance. Well, jouissance is Roland Barthes' term. It means both extreme pleasure and also extreme pain. It's a kind of posh French word for orgasm, actually. And it's a word that's different from the French plaisir, which just means pleasure. And even though he initially applied the term to literature, it's probably more applicable, more relevant to sound and music, and sound in particular. And if you think about bass as a form of affect, and the role of bass, especially in relation to, say, the traditions of reggae sound system culture, where bass, it's both pleasurable, but also extreme. And the physical act of just being in a sound system or a rave or a very bass-heavy club in a very dark, sweaty space, and with a very loud sound system, it takes you to a place that possibly encourages you to question even your physical self. It almost has a kind of transcendental significance. I'm not talking about sound systems that are weak or bar sound systems. I'm talking about sort of sound systems whereby bass is seen to be the most important part of the sonic spectrum. So bass is both inner, it's the inner space and the inner world. We experience bass in the context of the heart of sound that we experience internally. But also it's significant in terms of the sense whereby our first experiences of sound, our first auditory experiences are actually in the mother's womb. And the higher frequencies of our hearing haven't developed yet. They don't develop until after you're born.
Many researchers have identified a connection to pre-birth experiences and the love of bass. Before we are born, we have not had the chance to experience the high end of the spectrum. Perhaps a trip to a nightclub might be a way to subconsciously relive that maternal experience of floating in the amniotic fluids.
I think like when you have your early, at least in a musical context, your early bass experiences, it gives you a sense of vibration, tactility of sound, and immersion that is really the kind of experience you've not had since you were in the womb. Because usually, it's in a dark club situation. So when you kind of lock off one of the senses, it tends to intensify some of the other senses. So when you can't see so well, your hearing becomes more important in order to navigate the space and know what's going on and to orientate yourself. And obviously our first experiences of anything, but in this context of sound, are, as your organs start to develop in the womb. The blind experience of being in the womb in darkness and your early experiences of sound systems, wherever they may be, is definitely a parallel there.
The UK hip-hop jungle duo Smith and Mighty named their album Bass is Maternal, because bass has a kind of a power that resonates with both safety, being kind of transported around in the mother's womb, being surrounded by, low frequency sonority makes you feel safe. It makes you feel, to some extent, empowered and, stable. But also, it's dangerous. Bass, because it's perhaps linked to those very primordial experiences, it also introduces the feeling that your sense of self can fall apart at any stage. Bass is so powerful, it forces you to actually question in those very extreme instances. Perhaps even with the taking of psychoactive substances, you begin to question your sense of self because it takes you to this generative primordial moment of before you had a self, when you were in the mother's womb, when you didn't really have an identity. So it's both this extreme feeling of safety and danger that makes bass such an interesting concept, as well as a kind of communicative medium that exists within music, and especially sub bass. The bass sounds that really push at the extreme end of what human beings can actually hear. Those are 20 decibels, and it's a really that those frequencies in many ways are the most unsettling and most dangerous, because you feel those, you don't really hear them anymore. It's a feeling.
In other words, bass is the place. Nightclubs and other spaces where music is experienced collectively are recreations of how humans first shared experiences and information. Imagine how our ancestors would have had huddled around fires, passing down stories and information, much in the same way the Koro tribe do to preserve their languages. These social artifacts point to the way in which the collective vibration of a group of people might hold the keys to ideas, to themes such as resonance and the vibration of matter.
I mean, the research from my book Sonic Warfare really goes back to the mid-90s, I think, and a number of things in the mid-90s. I was coming down to London, going to Notting Hill Carnival, and I vividly remember one year being in a friend's flat, looking down on the street, and I think it was the Rampage sound system, and they were playing Jungle, and the street was packed, like there was no space, it was just packed full of bodies. And so from above, it looked like you had this tube or this container tightly packed with particles, and the particles were bodies. And the DJ dropped a track, I can't remember what the track was, and from above, you really couldn't tell the difference between the crowd going crazy with enjoyment and there being a riot. And so I became fascinated by this kind of turbulent, vortical behavior in crowds triggered by sound. In the instance of Jungle, it's like triggered by the bass drop.
In music, we talk about feel and vibe, because that's exactly what this sensation is. And when it's experienced collectively, when you have a large group of people that are feeling this resonance, they kind of get into a synchronization, and there's this subconscious bonding that happens. Everyone feels it. It's feeling the vibe. It's you're all feeling the same thing, and it's beyond a sort of cerebral, logical explanation, because it's a subconscious communication.
How often do we stop to analyze how our environments are making us feel? Researchers know that soundscape has a huge impact on the quality of life, but also the way that we reinterpret sound. In a way, this feeds back into our popular culture. Sound has a huge impact on how people feel. Schaefer was an environmentalist who separated soundscapes into lo-fi and hi-fi soundscapes and made a distinction between how the information coded within these soundscapes and signals are translated.
Well, we hear the train going off into the distance. We can hear some birds, of course. We can hear some traffic noise from Highway 7, quite distant. The most interesting thing, of course, is the birds at this time of the day. You can hear them in all directions.
Yes, the urban is part of it. I think the urban, living and growing up in a city, and being surrounded by many kinds of sounds, sounds that are associated with machinery or technology in particular, transportation, the media. It's mid and long-term impacts are possibly one of desensitization. So they fit into the kind of ideas of somebody like Schaefer and his concept of the lo-fi soundscape, whereby sounds are communicated, but in a way whereby their signals are always crossed. They're always sounds that are heard in conjunction or in combination. Whereas in nature, what he would call what we experience as a hi-fi soundscape, whereby sounds have a kind of separation, and they seem to have a sort of a natural origin, and their location in terms of having been produced within a particular place or by an animal or in a particular situation is much clearer than in the city, whereby those sounds and signals are crossed and occur in a mixture. And so it's not just the kind of heaviness or the sonority of living and growing up in the city, it's the kind of the lack of clarity about where those sounds have necessarily come from. And so a kind of combined effect is produced against the experience of the lo-fi soundscape. And that possibly has the effect of making us feel less certain about who we are, where we are, and produces a sense in which we're questioning constantly, perhaps not always in a constructive way. And I think actually a kind of music like drum and bass, which is based on its speed, is based on a sense of trying to make sense of the surrounding complexity of the environment, is why that music could only really have kind of come from the inner city or the urban or the metropolitan.
It's the frequencies within the soundscape that drive us. The term resonant frequency is used to describe the natural frequency vibration of an object. And it's often in nature that we find these ideas of frequency resonance most vibrant and visible.
Everyone knows that music is a great healer. It's been understood for millennia, but the explanation as to why and how that works and it had been a mystery, but I believe this hypothesis explains exactly how and why it works. Resonance travels throughout the entire body and stimulates the body on a cellular level. And the wave patterns that are created within water, which the body is, are not simply waves as you would imagine traveling through a pond. The propagation of the waves in water, depending on the frequency, generate these intricate patterns called Faraday waves, which are very distinct shapes, very distinct three-dimensional waveforms, which change with frequency. They jump to different shapes. The geometry of these three-dimensional waveforms are immediately recognizable as existing in the natural world, in the development of cells, of simple life forms. And so it begs the question whether sound and the formation and development of life itself are intimately connected. When you observe these patterns, you get a sense of what's going on inside the body when we resonate with the music. That these beautiful dancing, changing patterns are happening within groups of cells within your whole cardiovascular system, stimulating the body. It's easy to understand why that's such a pleasant sensation, and why the limbic system seems to respond so well to it and is drawn to it, because the immune system operates at this level, and so it kind of creates an environment that helps the system's function, sort of shakes up the system and makes our natural healing ability that much more effective.
By now, you should be becoming more aware of how the presence of sound affects us. For those of us who are able to hear sound, we often take for granted the ability to interpret the world in this way. What happens when we remove sound? What would happen if your ability to hear sound was significantly reduced?
Chris is a profoundly deaf dance instructor, choreographer from London. We work really closely with him, and he uses Subpac technology to enable him to have that direct connection to music. He uses wearable Subpacs, the M2, in all of his dance lessons, whenever he does choreography with other dancers, whenever he's doing workshops with people from the hard of hearing and deaf communities. And, you know, something like that, to be able to help someone like Chris, really, really get that connection to music. And let's be honest, you can't dance. How can you dance without feeling the music? I use the word feel there in a different context, but Chris uses our technology to put him more in contact without having to, you know, turn the volume levels up in these studios that he's doing the dance lessons with. Something like that it's a life changer for people that are you know, on that spectrum of hearing loss. And you know, you don't have to just be profoundly deaf or whatever. You know, there's obviously, as we get older, our high frequencies generally, they're the ones that become damaged, and that's why people have issues with, you know, being able to understand other people talking and things like that. Low frequencies, people don't think about that, but when you have a piece of technology like Subpac, and it's so accurate and the dynamics are there, you know, I've said this to you before, you know, when we spoke about it, you can discern the key of a song through feeling alone. And, you know, you can give music theory classes to people that are deaf using Subpac and vibrations. So that is a key part of our mission at Subpac, you know, to give people feeling, and regardless of their situation or their disability. It's a lot more obvious in use cases, especially with someone like Chris Fonseca.
This is a journey into sound, a journey which along the way will bring to you new color, new dimension, new values, and a new experience. Stereophonic sound.
I'm just a hoodlum, I came in my bones, some niggas wanna try some. Did you see what I done? Came in the black Benz, left in the white one. I'm just a hoodlum, I came with a bun, some niggas wanna try some. Came looking like a ganja farmer. Your daddy better hide his daughter. Shake a bunda just like I taught her. Splash the bunda with holy water. Lick a spice for the winter season. Your chicken